think I took with me from Vienna a certain philosophy which helped me here. And when I looked at Jerusalem and the differences in people, I came to the conclusion that you could run a peaceful city only by a very high amount of tolerance. My only effort was to get normal, decent, neighborly relationship in the city. And I think this was achievable and is still achievable. I became mayor and I stuck to it for 28 years. It was, of course, a divided city. Great parts of the city you couldn't visit because people shot from the other side. It was the poorest possible city. It was cut off for a long time through a siege. I had hoped, of course, that the city would become one by peaceful means, by children playing on the frontier or so. It became eventually one city during the Six-Day War. I became a mayor of a complete city, but a very difficult city. 40 different Christian denominations, 75,000 Arabs, who were not always very lovingly related. I think in the end we'll have peace here. I don't think it will come fast, even if these agreements are carried out, and new agreements will be carried out. The hatred is too deep, and it has to evaporate over time. But I have no doubt about the end result. The end result will be peace. The citadel was first built by Herod about the time of Christ. And when the Romans came and destroyed the city, they didn't destroy the citadel because they wanted to continue using it as a strong point for their army. And since then, it has always been used for military purposes. The tower now, this one and that one, as you see it, has been built by Suleiman the Magnificent 500 years ago. Down below, if you look, you will see much bigger stones. Those are still the remnants of Herod. When we, in this case, the Israelis, came here in '67, it was a Jordanian army post. And we decided to try to turn it into something civilian, to use it as a museum of the history of Jerusalem. I was born on the 27th of May of 1911. It was in a small Hungarian village where my father had an assignment. It was a large estate that belonged to the Rothschilds. He had been working for the Rothschilds in Vienna, and he spent some time there on this estate. Within months, and I don't remember that period at all, we returned to Vienna, and I regard myself for all practical purposes, for good or bad, a Viennese. I grew up in Vienna, and when the war started, in 1914, my father, who had gone to university, as every university student, was a reserve officer in the Austrian army, and he joined the army. In 1918, At the end of the war, my father went back to work for the Rothschilds. That was, of course, in Vienna. And we went back to Vienna and we rented a house where we lived, where my parents lived, until they left for Palestine in 1938. Nothing has changed here. These are all the same buildings that were here at the time. We lit candles on Friday evenings. We went on all the holidays to a nearby synagogue. We kept more or less a kosher house. I don't know how strict, but certainly nothing definitely non-kosher would have ever entered the house. And my father was what you then called religious, not what you call today. This was a more liberal religious attitude than is today customary. But I remember Oberrabbiner Chayes very well. He was a very impressive personality. He was a great Zionist. He was the chairman of the Zionist Actions Committee. Not all rabbis were Zionists. He was an exception. And I think his influence was much later. I had lessons before my bar mitzvah. To the shock of my parents and all the others, at the end of my prepared rasha, I said I would like to add something. And I added the fact that I belonged to a youth movement and we wanted such a boat, and I would be very happy if we could get contributions for it. And we did, and we were able to buy the boat.
Was it your first fundraising action?
Absolutely. Lueger was long before my time. He was a very famous mayor who did very much for the development of Vienna. And that was his major achievement, of course. But at that time you had the beginning of anti-Semitism, because it was the time of emancipation and Jews started penetrating the society, and that created the anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was a social anti-Semitism, not a violent anti-Semitism. But he was the symbol of it and so to say, the father of this kind of anti-Semitism in Austria. My father was a member in the same students' organization, the Lese- und Redehalle, where Herzl had been a member before, so I was given that name. Here we marched by students and youth movements and Zionists once a year on Herzl's birthday or death day, I don't remember anymore. And I'm very grateful to the people here that they kept the grave as it was, although the remains of Herzl and his parents were transferred to Jerusalem, where we are commemorating Herzl's birthday once a year. But this is exactly how I remember it, the same black stone and the white stone around. I haven't been in there since. It's a very moving memory. I went much more to the youth movement than I went to school. I was not a particularly good student because study didn't very much interest me. What interested me was the youth movement, the Blau-Weiß, the Tchelet Lavan. And that was a youth movement, a Jewish youth movement, a Zionist youth movement, which eventually accepted rules that you can remain in the movement only if you intended in the end to go to Palestine and join a kibbutz there. That became gradually their ideology, and I remained. Obviously, I was ready one day to go to Palestine and join a kibbutz. And I served as a messenger boy at the Zionist Congress in 1925 that took place in Vienna. And through that I became, of course, at least visually familiar with some of the great leaders of the Zionist movement, Dr. Weizmann and Mr. Ben-Gurion and Mr. Sharet and others. So for me this was a very exciting affair. While I was working in the movement in Germany, we saw a great development towards National Socialism and towards Hitlerism. There in a winter camp that we had in 1933, we had the first clash with a group of Nazi youngsters. It wasn't very serious, but still you didn't know what would happen. And then at the end of January, Hitler was installed as the Chancellor by the President, General Hindenburg. And I left Germany very soon afterwards. And at that time, my certificate from the British also materialized. I had waited for a long time, but finally my turn came on as well. And in the end of 1935, I traveled to Israel on a boat, and it was called Jerusalem. Maybe that was symbolic. Anyway, I came and I joined a kibbutz in Kinneret, which afterwards settled in Engeb. This was a period when such settlements were started, 2 or 3 already before us and some 30 after Engeb. We went on 20 or 30 trucks with walls, wooden walls prepared and a wooden watchtower prepared and everything else to the place early in the morning at dusk, and the village was set up, the very primitive houses, the walls to protect you, the watchtower to watch out against any kind of danger, and it was a major operation during the day. People came from fairly far away to help us to fill these double walls with gravel that they took from, in this case it was easy, that they took from the shores of the sea, where gravel had accumulated over hundreds of years. And in the end of the day, we were left there to fend for ourselves and to take care of ourselves. in a new village that has been created in one day. At that time also, my wife Tamar, whom I had known in Vienna and who had been to the same youth movement, and we went out together in Vienna, and we planned to live together, had come to Israel, and we got married. It was no great ceremony, no great affair, but it enabled her legally to remain in Palestine. The British were very strict on these forms. Here it starts with prehistory, and then come Jewish and Christian moments, then come the Muslim, and then it goes until 1967. The later period has not been treated yet. If you have any questions here, I'm ready to answer. Here you have a model of the city of David. At that time, it had become a policy to send people from kibbutzim to abroad, to various countries where youth movements were in existence, and to help them in motivation and in organization. I was pressured into going to England and work with the Habonim youth movement, which I did for a short while, end of 1938 and beginning of 1939. Things in Germany became worse and worse, and one day all the young people who had been on preparations for Palestine and had been in training in farms to become farmers in Palestine were arrested. They gave us 3,000 certificates for such people to go to England, not to Palestine. And I went on a very short trip from England to Europe. I went further, I went to Vienna, and there I had the chance to speak to the officer who was in charge of Jewish affairs. He was a man whose name afterwards became obnoxious, but at the time he was not known at all. He was an unknown quantity. He sat in his office in a black uniform of an SS man. Name was Eichmann. You all know what Eichmann meant a lot later, but at that time he was just a nondescript officer, and I came to him with my story. At the time, the Germans had not yet decided on the liquidation of the Jews. What they wanted at that time was to get rid of the Jews in their area. Anyway, Eichmann agreed to let these 3,000 youngsters, partly from Austria, partly from Czechoslovakia, partly from Germany, go to England, and I felt that I had done an important job, an important mission. And until today, I sometimes meet people who had at the time gone to England, but at the end of the war, they came to Israel. That was the whole purpose, and it worked out. We wanted to bring Jews in, and we brought them in even by illegal means, illegal ships that ran the gamut of the British Navy. Then this was frozen. We were looking for contact with Jewish groups, underground groups in Europe. We wanted that in order to encourage them, to help them, if not otherwise, by sending them money if possible. We wanted that in order to help here or there if we could save somebody by taking somebody out. And Istanbul was a neutral capital from which you could have contact with occupied Europe. I came there under the aegis of the British Secret Service. They allowed me to come there. They gave me the cover. And I got a permit from the British that I was a journalist. The journalist was the editor of the Engeb Daily, which didn't exist. It was a very sad period. We were living to try and help, and our means were very limited. At that time, we heard for the first time of the terrible things that happened in the camps. And we tried to convey this, and we conveyed it to Geneva, where there was an office of the Jewish Agency, and we conveyed it to Jews in the United States and to Jews in Britain. But they weren't able to awake the world to it. And the world didn't believe it for a long time, that such things could at all happen. At the end of the war, the first city I visited was Munich, and the nearest concentration camp to Munich was Dachau, to see the things about which I had heard and which had been described in letters there and back, and which had been our everyday affair, so to say, to see it physically. And I saw physically what I expected to see, what I need. Today, nowadays, you have individuals who say all this didn't exist at all this didn't happen, and you have all these people who try to deny that the Holocaust happened at all. Well, I saw Dachau with my own eyes, and I know that it happened, and it was just as terrible as you ever thought it was. You see a comparatively modern Jerusalem that has been built by Herod. He builds the temple. Now, a part of this is visible for everybody who goes to the old city. The stairs have been destroyed, but the stones there under the stairs are still there. Those can still be seen if you look at the above the Wailing Wall. Herod had been spending a good deal in Rome, and he was very obligated to the emperors of Rome, and he tried to imitate them by the vastness of his building. In 1946, when Ben-Gurion came over to the United States, he had gathered some 20, 30 outstanding supporters of Zionism, explained to them that the conditions were such that most probably the final decision would be taken by arms against the British, against the Palestinians. One didn't know yet, but one had to prepare a strong military force. And the only strong military force that existed in Israel was the Haganah. Of course, it had to be changed into a regular fighting force. In September 47,